Hey everyone, thanks for dropping by. I'm very excited about having my special guest today, Wanda Hardee Kidd. Wanda, how are you doing today?
I'm really well. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, of course. Listen, let me try to walk through the bio about you a little bit, and you can tell me if everything is real or if I've fabricated some of these things.
If I like it better, I'll just let you go.
Yes, and you can hold up little cue cards for me too. I know you've worn a lot of hats, so to speak. You are a retired campus minister. You've worked with CBF North Carolina and CBF Global. You've also worked on several church staffs in South Carolina and North Carolina. You have been involved with campus ministry at Mars Hill College, which that's in North Carolina, right?
Yep.
Okay. And then also Western Carolina, and both of those together about 17 years.
Yes. Yes.
And okay, now education, let me see if I got this right. You got your undergraduate from Western Carolina University, and you have an MDiv and a religious education degree from Southeastern Baptist Theological Seminary, and you have a Doctor of Ministry from Drew University.
True. I
Okay,
sound smarter than I am, but
okay. Well, I want to, Dr. Kidd, let me ask you this: as one doctoral person to the other, what was your project on? Do you remember what your project was about?
yeah, because I loved what I did my project on. I worked for the Baptist State Convention of North Carolina at that time, and they had put us under the auspices of the evangelism team, and we in campus ministry were not really comfortable with that. So when I got time to do my doctoral program, I wanted to do it on evangelism, and I wanted to demythologize several of the things that the mainline traditions were considering important. So I did it on it was called listening evangelism, and it was
Did you say listening evangelism?
yes.
Wow, okay.
And it was designed for a person who was a campus minister. So I had a team of 8 students, and it was designed for them to tell their story. And this was 25 years ago. So this was pretty new conversation. And they told their story, and then they wrote a gospel where they talked about when did Jesus enter their life, what impact had that had on their life, and what impact had their life had on the kingdom. And then, but they didn't get to interpret that. They had to give it to another person in the small group and have them interpret their gospel back to them. And so it was very in my first group of 8, 4 ended up going to seminary because it was just life altering to see that your story could be heard. The whole point was a Leonard Sweet statement that said
I like
postmodern.
a good Leonard Sweet quote, Wanda.
He didn't like me, but he did like that I
We got to name drop as much as possible.
yes, young adults. I changed it to young adults. He said postmoderns. Postmoderns don't want to hear our story. They want us to hear their story. And we need to be confident and equipped to help them understand where Jesus was already working in their lives. And that's how I went with that. And so it was a turning on the ear of the 2-minute elevator
Oh, yeah.
conversation about your story. And I had somebody say to me, well, we do that same thing. We listen to somebody's story, so they'll have to listen to our story. And then we get to tell them our story. And I went, actually, that is opposite of what we were thinking. But anyway, yes, it's still relevant. It's still a good project. I think I'm going to do it again in the fall with a small church.
Well, I wanted to talk a little bit about college ministry, of course. And I would imagine working with college students that you enjoy a good road trip. Am I right?
Yep,
Okay.
absolutely.
Okay. So when you go on a road trip, are you a detailed planner or do you like to just kind of get started and see what happens?
I would say I was both. I like to know where I'm starting, and I like to know a direction that I'm going. And I usually try to decide a day ahead where I was going to get my next room. I'm not a go till the lights need to be on your car before you decide where you're going to stay that night. So that gives me, I've always found that to give me a destination, knowing with destination. Then I knew how many other places I could go off that road that day to get to that other place by night.
So a little bit of both is what you're saying. Okay. When you look back on where you've been and what you've done, what do you wish you knew then that you know now, as far
That,
as ministry goes?
thank you.
I was looking at your face. I wanted to qualify that a little bit.
Thank you for that
How much time do
clarification.
we have? I don't know.
Yes. I just learned the same things over and over that people are people, and they just want to be valued and they wanted to feel like their life had purpose and meaning. And what I learned it each time I met somebody. So there was a different story to be heard, but the message was still the same. Young people as old people, everybody just wants to know they have value.
Yeah.
And that's how the ministry that I've always done was kind of to hope. When I was a campus minister and we had our own building, and it was the students who stood around in the edges that I always wanted to go lean on the wall beside. Tell me your story. So
Yeah.
doing my project on storytelling was not new. I mean, being a storyteller has been part of who I've been my whole life. My sister, I would ask her to do things and she would say, why did you think I wanted to do that? And I said, because it's going to make a great story. We're going to love this. She said, if you tell me that one more time, I may have
Yeah,
to
the
do it.
inherent value, we're not sure about it, but we'll tell the story and get
Yes,
some benefit out of it.
yes,
Well, my last church, we were right across the street from a university, but I found even with that proximity, it was just really hard to connect with students. Do you find that to be true? Generally speaking, do churches have a challenge in doing that?
yes, they do. And I wrote an article one time that they are who you created them to be. You told them to be afraid of strangers, and they are. You told them they were not going to have enough without you, and they don't believe they do. So there is some cultural things, some parenting things, but yes, and institutions have lied to people since there've been institutions, but somehow we drew a line and said all institutions are suspect. And so we really have to work hard to interact with young adults, and we're not used to having to work that hard. We're used to opening the doors and saying, come in, you're welcome. I realize that most young adults think that a lot of signs that say all are welcome, the thing that is written in invisible ink is if, that, dot, dot,
Yeah.
all are welcome if, and they don't know. And they're very loyal to each other in some ways. So if they even think that their friends wouldn't be welcomed, they wouldn't take the effort to do that.
I think that's right because with our three, that they're all in college right now, which is hard to believe. Being authentic is such a big deal to them, and so they continue to remind me about that, not only as their dad, but as a pastor too. I wanted to ask you this as far as your ministry in general, did you ever feel limited or told what you could and could not do in the ministry, as I see you laughing right now, based upon your particular gender?
I
We can go the lightning round if you want to, but
I would just say that more than one of my mentors, pastors, employers have said, I know you've never had a boss. I don't take no very well. And I usually have a reason for why I'm going to do what I'm going to do. And I will argue the case, not with you, but I'll argue the case. And so I think probably I have not felt that as much as a lot of women felt. I had a father who thought I was smart and thought he would let me reason with him. I have changed his mind about things. So
yeah.
when you grow up like that, you just assume that everybody is interested in you and what you have to say. So there you go.
Well, along those lines, and I again, this is didn't give you any prep for this, but in some of the reading, and I'm going to get to your good faith recognition a little bit in a moment. But do you remember a particular insult or the worst thing that maybe someone said to you, like you were about to teach or preach and serving on a church staff, and kind of looking back on that?
Because she wrote that one that I usually say, the guy who said, I ain't never sat under no
Yes.
woman
I'm going to
preacher.
let you say it because it.
I was walking down a hall going into the big fellowship room where I was supposed to speak, and there was a man sitting on a couch kind of in the shadows. And I think more than anybody saying anything to me, but they've always said it about people, but not in a way that they expected you to engage with them. And that is really I don't have a fourth wall, I don't think. I mean, when people act like they're not going to. So I was walking down the hall and I heard this man mumbling to himself. I ain't never sat under no woman preacher before. And I just stopped and I looked at him and I said, I had just come to share the gospel, but if you need me to sit on you, I guess I could do that. And he was quite chagrined. And the other part is he came up after the sermon and thanked me. I have somebody told me the other day that I have a pretty unusual ability to speak truth to people without them being mad at me. So I think that has served me well.
Well, on a similar note, of course, I was glad to see you in St. Louis for the CBF General Assembly. But there was another Baptist group that was meeting over the course of the summer. The Southern Baptist Convention had their annual meeting, and I found this on your blog, The Many Thoughts of Wanda Kidd. Is that right? There's one thing I know about you. You have many thoughts, Wanda. I think that would probably
Not
be right.
always parallel, no.
I know, but I grew up Southern Baptist, and for some people this might be ancient history, but since you wrote about it, and I reflect upon this too, how did the 2000 Baptist Faith and Message, that was 25 years ago, and the SBC celebrated that, I'm using the air quotes, at their last meeting. What was the impact for you then, and maybe does it impact you today?
Well, I think it impacts all of us today. I never really thought about it impacting me, but what I said in the blog was the students kept coming to me saying, well, like I also said, many churches were not talking about it, but because I was campus minister and the students weren't paying my salary, I felt more at ease to speak what I thought. And I passed out it was on the Southern Baptist Convention's website where they laid the two side by side, the
I remember
63
that.
and the
Yeah.
2000. And I ran it off and just left it on the corner of my desk for people to look at. So when they would say, well, what's the difference? I say, I don't know, take it up and look at it yourself. And so they would come back and say, oh, I bet you're really upset about this women not being in a pulpit. And I said, no, that's not what bothers me. Because what bothers me is when they said that the scripture was inerrant and it was a lateral understanding of the scripture. I said, what they've done there is that they've reduced Jesus so that they could make everyone else's words equal to his. So anything they wanted to say about Paul was just as important as what they thought they were saying about Jesus. And I'm watching that today, the diminishing of Jesus's impact on the Christian gospel, where so much more is said about everybody else, but Jesus, where I wrote in there that I always went through seminary and even school and Sunday school thinking that you took everything and wove it through who Jesus was and what Jesus was teaching. And so your Old Testament understanding of Jesus, understanding of God came through Jesus. Well, that seems to have been flattened out.
Yeah.
That is a very huge concern.
Yeah, and for me, the preamble, really the section on the scripture, and we're not going to unpack the whole thing, but for me, when you change it from the scripture being the record of God's revelation to revelation, I was thinking, well, Jesus is the revelation. How do some of your non-Baptist friends, when they observe the things that's been happening over the last, I don't know, several years or decades, what's been their reaction to some of these things?
Well, I realize that most people don't think about this as much as you and I do.
We're going to find out, right? But it's
They,
just you and me right now.
that's right. They haven't given this much thought, and that was table conversation in my growing up. We
Oh,
talked
yeah.
about Bible and Jesus and how it impacted other people. And when I would bring that up, people say, I just don't want to be political or I don't want to talk about that. And I remember explaining to somebody, which now has been diminished, but it made a impact on her then when she said, why would you believe the Bible? Everything's changed. I said, well, why do you live by the Constitution? Everything's changed. It evolves as we have a better understanding of different things. The Bible doesn't change, but our understanding of the Bible changes. And now we have completely dismantled the Constitution. So it is hard. Everything just keeps getting flattened
Yeah.
down to be what makes you happy.
Yeah. Well, let's try to move a little bit closer to where we are now. And I know this was 5 years ago, and we talked a little bit about this. You did go on a cross-country trip by yourself, and Good Faith Media produced this for you. It's called Journey Through the Desert. And at the preface of every episode, and I was listening to this as I was doing my walking this past week, the intro says, in early 2020, burdened by grief, she left home alone. A road trip, just Wanda, her truck camper, and a broken spirit, she found healing in her desert wanderings. And I know it's been a few years, but I want to draw attention to it because I think this could be helpful to people. So my question is, what was going on at the time where you said, I need to do this?
I had always said, I'm a road tripper, so there you go. And I'd always said to my husband, when my dad dies, don't look for me to be there for a good day or two. I'm just going to get in a car and drive away. And when I can quit crying, I will come home. Well, he died unexpected. I mean, he was 88 years old, so but it was unexpected. He was in the hospital for something else. And he died, and I was the only one there to be with him because everybody had gone to lunch because that was the way he wanted it. And then at that point, my mother was diagnosed with Parkinson's, and she died a year and a half later. And as my mother died, my sister was diagnosed with a brain tumor, and a year and a half later, she died. And then 11 weeks after that, my brother died. And through all of that, my husband was having bypass surgery, etc. All of that happened in 5 years. And I didn't have time to grieve. I mean, I'm not an easy griever. I'm a presser downer. And
Okay.
so I just didn't have time. My favorite, I don't even know if I write this in the book, but Dan, my husband, is a certified public accountant, and camping is like the last thing. He would have to be homeless, and there would have to be nothing for him to say. So this was like a year after the last family member had died, and we were
Yeah.
driving down the interstate, and a little car pulling a teardrop camper went by. And I said, I don't think I'm going to finish that sentence. And he said, you were going to say if I had died, you were going to buy a camper, weren't you? And I said, well, yes. And he said, what if I don't die and you just buy a camper? I said, what a great idea. So he was very supportive of me, knowing that I just needed to separate all that and sort it out and just let God speak to me. I wasn't mad at God. We didn't break up. We were not speaking to each other.
I got it. Well, talking about speaking, and I just want to draw out a couple of things from some of the episodes because obviously you're going on a road trip. You're going to meet some people, and in one of the episodes you mentioned talking about meeting strangers on the road and the bond that is created when you listen to each other's stories. Why is that important? And was it important?
Yeah, because it has been 5 years and it's still just as fresh almost. Because I was alone, I didn't want to go into restaurants when the crowds were there. So I would eat a meal around 2 in
Because
the
this was
afternoon.
COVID too.
No, COVID happened at the end.
Oh, okay.
I had to come home because of COVID, but I had 3 months before COVID hit. And I would go in around 2 o'clock, and so the wait staff wasn't working, and they would just sit down with me and talk to me. And there was this story of this young woman who, this was, during the time of the first people being sent back to Mexico and all of the deportations. And she was a young woman who was an American citizen. But she saw that, and she went on her own money and her own time, went down to the border to translate for these young people who were there, and just told me this story. And just what courage. I mean, I said, you went alone? Yes, I went alone. So being alone in a camper seemed like a piece of cake after talking to this young woman who had just taken what she had and gone down. And she was there 6 or 8 months translating for these people. So that's a story that I got to put in my heart and come home with.
Yeah. Well, on the road, you mentioned, of course, and we know this, the church is not necessarily the building, it's the people. But you also talked about sacred moments on the road. And how do you know when you're getting into a sacred moment?
I mean, my memory has always been like taking photographs. So it would be a glimpse of something that would say, whoa, a sunset. I remember this one lone tree in the middle of this desolate part of Texas. And there was a railroad track running beside it. And the loneliness depicted in that picture brought me to tears. I mean, it was just the train was coming through this one tree, nothing else, no foliage. And I thought, oh my gosh, that makes my heart hurt.
Yeah.
That is the picture of loneliness for me that day.
Yeah. Well, the whole, your podcast series, and for you being so transparent about your experiences, I benefited from that. But it also raises for me the larger question of like clergy burnout and discouragement. And I found it interesting, and I don't know if this is an exact quote, Wanda, but At least for me, I think about the times when we're in the midst of grief and maybe we're around other people who are experiencing grief, maybe the same thing we are. Do you ever, at least for me, sometimes I feel this urge like to flip the switch and I have to stop grieving myself and I've got to help all of these other people. Does that make sense, or have you
Yes.
ever felt that way?
That truly, I mean, that's what put me on the road. I did all 4 funerals. They all were cremated, so there was no funeral home to help me with any of that. My sister was beloved in our town, and she came. We did hospice for her at my parents' house, and honestly, she was only in hospice 2 weeks, and over 250 people came to the house to see her.
Wow.
Well, there was no grieving space for me in that part. So it was, and that was when I completely filled up and thought, I have been everything I can be to everybody. I can't do this anymore. Yes. But I also was given great permission from the Baptist from North Carolina to say, just go. I guess I looked horrible. Just go, Wanda. And, so, so I would say, look pitiful. People will probably find ways for you to.
That's a good tip. We'll try to keep that in mind. I want to talk about what you're doing right now, and I was noticing your Facebook page.
Okay.
I think one of the last entries you had was about the 4th of July, and you were at a fundraiser, and someone else was performing as Johnny Cash. I didn't think that was you performing as Johnny Cash.
Or June. I was neither.
Yeah, well, it says you were doing stand-up and storytelling to help raise money for the church that was damaged by Hurricane Helene. I want to ask you how that went, and really just in general, how is the hurricane recovery going? I know you're working with CBF about that.
I am. I don't think it says anything about us, but we raised $3,000 that day. But church people who've never been to a stand-up comedy thing, they really weren't comfortable. I mean, I didn't do anything off color at all, but they were not laughing at things that people have been laughing at for 50 years. So I knew it was good stuff.
Okay.
So I think I could go back and they would do better with understanding the point, but they were gracious. I still like to tell a story. And so I probably, when Helene is over, one of my favorite, if you go to my podcast, it was from September to May or something like that. It was something from fall. And it's a story of the impact of Helene, that even after the rhododendron bloom and the kudzu grows over all the wreckage, there's still woundedness underneath all of that. And that would be true for us as well as the land. The one thing that we've done for this summer that I'm really proud of so many people for doing this, we did, somebody came up to me from Kentucky in March and said, you should be feeding more people this summer than just a camp. And I said, well, I mean, I've done my job. I don't know. But anyway, so I couldn't
Yeah.
sleep that night. So I came up with this idea of how to feed 100 families for the month of July. And I thought if I did 10 sites and they did 10 families, they found their own families, I could do this. So I went back to the meeting that day and found 3 people that I thought were churches I'd been working with, and they said yes. I said, if you don't have to raise your money, pack your bags, you don't have to do anything but deliver this to 10 people, would you be willing to do it? So we're just finishing this week. We have fed an average of 90 families a week.
That's great.
They got my favorite part is, and this is because nobody ever believes this, I was a home economics major, and I love to cook and I like to sew. And so all of this was shelf stable. I had to create 15 recipes that were completely shelf stable. And like, I didn't realize that they made sour cream that was dehydrated that you could put in beef stroganoff, but there is. And so all the meats were canned, and they were written so that a 5th grader could create the meals. So they got to pick 5 meals, and we put those bags in with all the ingredients for those 5 meals a week. So it was one more dignifying thing that I think people should have choices. I think they should have instructions. I think they
Yeah.
should be successful. So
That's great. Well, Superman movie just came out, and Fantastic Four is tomorrow, and Callie got us some tickets to go. I was going to ask you, would humor be your superpower?
I think so. I was a middle child, and that was my job, was to bring peace. And I did that almost always with disarming I think disarming humor is my
Well,
superpower.
are you performing because you've done some teaching and preaching and now the comedy stage? I was going to ask you, what are maybe a similarity with those and maybe some dissimilarities? I mean, you have to prepare,
Yeah.
I would imagine.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, you can't just get up there. No, I wanted to be a stand-up comedian my whole life. Somebody asked me, "Was this my 3rd choice?" And I went, "No, this is my 1st choice." But Minnie Pearl was still doing it, and I didn't wanna go to bars, and so for my junior Miss pageant when I was 17, I did stand-up comedy, and, so I think comedy still has a thing. My favorite preacher said to me, "If you're gonna write a sermon, you present them with a problem. You give them a situation of how you can maybe settle out that problem, and then you always leave them with a word of hope." And I find that to be true whether I'm preaching or doing humor.
Okay. Because I'm not sure where I read this, and even if I didn't read it somewhere, I'm going to say I read it somewhere. You are a life observer and humorist. Would that be a good way
Yes,
to describe you? The Good Faith Media folks, and I showed you the magazine a minute ago, they named you one of the 25 who inspire. I was going to ask you, how do you feel about that?
I was startled. I mean, really, I can't. I was reading the first 2 sentences, and I had already thought of 3 people I would recommend. I thought they were asking me to nominate some people. So I have no idea what I do that would be considered inspiring. I pondered that a minute or 2,
I don't
but
know about that, Wanda.
I just, no, I don't know. It's just somebody told me once, a student said, "Why don't I just give 5 minutes to walk around in your brain?" And I said, "The amount of therapy it would take you to overcome that,"
It would
which is
take longer than 5 minutes. Is that what you're saying?
yes.
Well, you've been named one of the 25 who inspired. Let's turn it around and ask you, are there a few people as you look at your life that might have been a mentor or an encourager or someone who might have inspired you?
Lots. Yes. I mean, I was always looking for people to inspire me to say, okay, like my campus minister probably is the reason I was just absolutely driven to be a campus minister, even though I didn't get to do it till I was 42, and everybody assumes that that's really old. But my campus minister changed my life. I mean,
Well, let me ask you this since you brought it up. I was going to mention it earlier, but what do you attribute, your longevity to work with students? That period of time, I mean, what was it? Was it just your unique personality that allowed you to continue to connect with the students?
I did overhear somebody one time. So I didn't know a student that I knew was behind me. And I said, "I love students. I love their quirkiness and their innovativeness." And I heard this voice behind me say, and we know it. And that, I mean, that was just such a blessed moment for me.
Wow.
He didn't even, I wasn't even speaking to him, but to come alongside of me and say, "We know that." And I think there is an authentic knowledge that I just love young adults. I love the struggles they go through. I love the things that they think are going to change their lives forever that is probably not going to change today, you know. And so I love standing there and I love holding up a mirror to them because they're not they're not so fixed in their
Yeah.
lives. They
Yeah.
can't
They're not
change.
hardened yet, right? I mean, they're still open.
You can say to somebody, I think there might be a way you could do this differently, and they still have time to do that. And so I preached this in a sermon the other day that this one student said, "I don't think you like me." And I said, "Well, I really don't, but it doesn't have to stay that way here."
Yes.
And he said, "Well, why don't you like me?" And I said, "Well, for one thing, you sat right there while a 41-year-old woman carried in 20 bags of groceries and didn't offer to help me. There is something you could do about that." So at the end, I said, "So let's go from here." And he stayed in the BSU. He went to seminary. I think that there is a dearth of honesty that is left on the table that would be life changing for people if you were willing to share it with them in purpose and love.
Well, what's next for you, Wanda? I mean, what keeps you going?
What keeps me going? Well, I'm thinking about post starting small houses for post foster care young men. And so that's where my energy is right now. I have one house with a house person. We haven't got the young person yet, but I've always felt like so many people see foster care kids as felons instead of victims. And
Yeah.
And so, how do we come alongside? One of my favorite, when we were getting a house approved where we could have somebody stay, still nobody stayed. So, if you're going to pray, this would be a good thing. But anyway, the fire chief was there, and we were telling him what we were hoping to do. And he said, "Do you think they'd want to be volunteer firemen?" And I thought, how wonderful that would be to be with people who had a purpose and they were going to change, save things. So, yeah, I just keep wanting to see how that door is going to open.
Okay. Well, I've got you for another minute or two. Any final thoughts or words of wisdom that you might pass along? We could talk a whole lot more about death, loss, and grief and those kind of things, but just any other final thoughts from you as far as your life and your ministry and working with students?
I found that most people felt like young adults thought they were irrelevant. And so that's how they approached young adults, with disdain or protection for their own self-esteem. I just want everybody to grow up.
Okay. That's true for any age, I
That's
would
true.
say.
I want us all to just grow up and approach each other as beloved children of God and see how that could change not just their life, but your life as well.
Now, I mentioned your blog a moment ago. You still post on that periodically?
Yes, I've been, for the last 4 weeks, we've been feeding 100 people a week. So
Yeah,
I haven't,
you've been kind of busy.
yes. So I'll come back to it.
Okay. Well, I'm really glad to see you,
I'm glad to see
and
you.
I appreciate your time, and I know the rest of us have enjoyed this little road trip
I hope so.
that we have been on for the last 30 minutes or so. So we have been listening to Wanda Hardee Kidd, and until next time, thanks for listening.
Thanks.